The train whistle pierced through the gray afternoon air as the locomotive pulled into the small Texas station. Rain fell steadily, drumming on the wooden platform and creating small rivers between the boards. Thomas Harper stood under the station's narrow overhang, his brown cowboy hat pulled low against the weather, watching passengers step down from the train cars. He was looking for someone specific. A woman named Elena Kovalenko, who had traveled all the way from Eastern Europe to become his mail-order bride. They had exchanged letters for 6 months, each one carefully written, each one building a picture of what their life together might be like. Thomas had been honest in his letters. He told her about his ranch, about the loneliness of working the land alone, about hoping to build a family with someone who understood the value of hard work and simple living. Elena had written back with equal honesty. She told him about her life in a small village, about losing her parents to illness, about having no family left and wanting to start fresh in America. Her English was imperfect in the letters, but Thomas could feel her sincerity in every carefully chosen word. Now, as the last passengers descended from the train, Thomas saw her. She was small and delicate, with dark hair pulled back in a braid, wearing a simple traveling dress that had seen better days. She carried one worn suitcase and clutched a piece of paper in her hand, probably the letter with his description and the meeting instructions. Thomas stepped forward into the rain, but before he could reach her, another man approached. This man was older, well-dressed in a suit that marked him as someone of means. Thomas recognized him, Gerald Thornton, a wealthy merchant from town who had also been looking for a wife through the mail-order system. "Miss Kovalenko?" Thornton's voice carried over the sound of the rain. Elena looked up, hope lighting her face. "Yes, I am Elena. You are Mr. "I am," Thornton interrupted, though he was not Thomas. "Let me take your bag. My carriage is waiting." Elena smiled with relief and began to follow him, but as they walked, she started talking, her words tumbling out in accented English. "The journey, it was very long. I am so happy to be here finally. In your letters, you write about the ranch and the animals. I'm very good with animals. In my village, I help with—" Thornton stopped walking. His expression had changed from welcoming to uncomfortable. "Your accent," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "It's quite thick, isn't it?" Elena's smile faltered. "Yes, I am sorry. My English, it is not perfect yet. But I learn quick. I practice every day on the—" "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," Thornton said coldly. "I was expecting someone who could speak properly, someone who could represent me in social situations. This won't work at all." The color drained from Elena's face. "But we write letters." "You know I am from—" "Written English is one thing," Thornton interrupted again. "But I can't have a wife who sounds like a foreigner. What would people think?" "I'm sorry, but I cannot honor this arrangement." He turned and walked away, leaving Elena standing alone on the platform in the rain. Her suitcase sat at her feet. The letter was still in her hand, now getting wet and causing the ink to run. She stood very still, as if she could not quite believe what had just happened. Thomas had watched the entire exchange from a few feet away. Now he stepped forward, his heart aching for this woman who had traveled so far only to be rejected for something so small, so meaningless. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Miss Kovalenko?" Elena looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears that mixed with the rain on her face. "Yes?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm Thomas Harper. I believe you and I have been writing letters to each other." Confusion crossed her face. "But that man," he said, that man was Gerald Thornton. He was expecting someone else. "But I was expecting you." Thomas held out the letter she had sent him weeks ago, now protected in his coat pocket. "You wrote to me about your village, about the apple trees behind your house, about your mother's recipe for honey bread. Remember?" Elena's eyes widened. "Yes, I remember." "But you are Thomas Harper? The rancher?" "I am," Thomas said. He picked up her suitcase. "And I think your accent is just fine. Actually, I think it's beautiful. It shows you've come a long way and you've been brave enough to start over." Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, but this time they were different. "You do not mind how I speak?" "Not even a little bit," Thomas said honestly. "What matters to me is what you say, not how you say it. And in your letters you said things that made me believe we could build a good life together." He held an umbrella over both of them, sheltering them from the rain. "Now I know this isn't how you imagined arriving. And I know you've just had a terrible experience. so I'm not going to rush you or pressure you. There's a respectable boarding house in town run by Mrs. Henderson. I can take you there and you can have time to rest and think about whether you still want to meet me properly. No obligation. Your journey is paid for. You can go back if you want or stay or do whatever feels right to you. Elena looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. Thomas met her eyes steadily, letting her see his sincerity. You would do this? She asked. You would give me choice even after I come all this way? Of course, Thomas replied. Marriage should be a choice, not a trap. Elena took a deep breath. I do not need boarding house, she said quietly. If you are who you say you are, if you are the man from the letters, then I already know you. I already choose you. Over the following weeks, Elena settled into life at Thomas's ranch. Her accent remained strong, and she continued to struggle sometimes with English words. But she learned quickly, and Thomas learned from her too. Words in her language, stories about her homeland, recipes that filled his simple farmhouse with new and wonderful smells. She was everything her letters had promised. She worked hard, rising early to help with the animals. She had a gift with the horses, speaking to them in her native language, which they seemed to understand better than English anyway. She planted a garden with seeds she had brought from her village. She mended Thomas's old clothes with tiny, perfect stitches, but more than her skills, Elena brought warmth to the ranch. She sang while she worked, old songs from her homeland that floated across the fields. She laughed easily once she felt safe enough to be herself. She told stories in the evenings, her accent making them seem more exotic and interesting. One evening, several months after her arrival, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elena leaned against Thomas's shoulder, comfortable now with his presence. You remember that day at the train station? She asked softly. When that man rejected me for how I speak? I remember, Thomas said. I was so afraid. I think maybe I make terrible mistake coming to America. Maybe nobody want me here. Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. I wanted you. From the very first letter I wanted you. Elena smiled. In my village, my babushka, my grandmother, she used to say that angels speak in many tongues. She say that God put different languages in world so we learn to listen with heart, not just with ears. Your grandmother was a wise woman, Thomas said. That man at station, he could not hear with his heart, Elena continued. But you could. From beginning, you hear me. Not my accent. Not my broken English. But me. Thomas turned to look at her. This brave woman who had crossed an ocean to start a new life. You know what I see when I look at you? He asked. What you see? An angel, Thomas said simply. My angel. Someone who was brave enough to leave everything familiar, strong enough to keep going after being rejected, and kind enough to give me a chance even after you'd been hurt. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. And you are my angel too. You see past words to heart. You give me home when I have none. You make me feel like I belong. They were married that autumn in a small ceremony at the local church. Elena wore a simple white dress and Thomas wore his best suit. When the preacher asked if they would honor and cherish each other, Elena's I do still carried the accent of her homeland, and Thomas thought it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The other townspeople eventually came to know and love Elena too. Her accent became familiar, a part of who she was. She opened a small bakery, selling bread and pastries made from her grandmother's recipes. People came from miles around to taste her cooking and to hear her stories. Gerald Thornton, the man who had rejected her at the station, eventually married a woman with perfect English and social graces. But his marriage was cold and formal, lacking the warmth that filled Thomas and Elena's home. As years passed, Thomas often thought about that rainy day at the train station. He thought about how differently things might have turned out if he had not been there, if he had given up on the mail order system, if he had judged Elena the way Thornton had. But he had not judged her. He had listened with his heart, just as her grandmother had taught. And in doing so, he had found not just a wife, but a true partner, a best friend, and yes, an angel who had come into his life when he needed her most. Elena never lost her accent completely, and she never wanted to. It was part of her story, part of what made her who she was, and Thomas would not have changed a single syllable of it. In his ears, her voice was perfect, the sound of home, of love, of a life built on acceptance and understanding rather than judgment. The ranch prospered, and